Being a less than comprehensive examination of mankind's attempts at amusement through the ages by means of gags, pranks, and other assorted tomfoolery.
From the burning deserts of northern Africa to the snow-covered mountains of Europe and the vast steppes of Eurasia, early man was in a relentless battle for his very survival. Battling the elements, constantly on the move, searching for food, shelter, and perhaps a neighborhood with good schools. It was an arduous life, marked by unending toil and full of unspeakable dangers. Despite the hardships and the lack of an adequate public education system, there was progress. Among the seminal events was the invention of the wheel. The mastery over fire, and of course, the discovery of sitting down. As our ancestors spent their days hunting woolly mammoth, or fleeing large carnivorous cats, there was little time for levity. Nevertheless, humor has played a pivotal role in our survival and acted a sort of social adhesive, which helped in societal bonding and subsequently, by extension, our advancement as a species. Prehistoric attempts at amusement can only be guessed at and are a matter of wide disagreement among members of the otherwise close-knit and highly reclusive Royal Society of Humor historians, seen here in this rare photograph from the late 19th century. Despite the speculative divergences, there's one thing on which the Society agrees. That's the historical origins of tomfoolery. It is universally held that the birthplace of humor, like the birthplace of Western civilization, was in that fertile crescent between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. The earliest archaeological record of slapstick can be traced to that portly Mesopotamian potentate, Hana-Rashapap of Po.
As seen here in this animated representation based on an illustration found on the wall of the temple of Babylonian goddess Komonyakidin.
It was in fact Hana-Rashap's cousin, Korni-Kuksapap, who is recognized as the father of the animal motif slippers, which he is seen sporting in this reproduction of an engraving in his tomb. The slippers were extremely popular among both the Mesopotamians and the Assyrians for nearly a century. Ultimately, the ongoing protests by animal rights groups, combined with a notable depletion of suitable small mammals, forced the substitution of fabrics for living creatures. Our knowledge of man's earliest efforts at amusement is due in no small part to the diligent efforts of that intrepid explorer and tireless archaeologist, Sir Edmund Hilarity of Devonshire. It was Hilarity and his team who discovered the first known use of modeling clay for making funny visages as early as 2500 BC, as seen here in this specimen from the Royal Museum in Devonshire. Later that same decade, an expedition led by Sir Edmund unearthed a clay tablet which stands as the oldest recorded one-liner. The inscription on the tablet reads, "Is that a scroll in your toga, or are you simply happy to see me?" Shortly before the onset of the Second World War, Hilarity set out on what was to become his last expedition, this time to Egypt, land of the pharaohs. It was here that Sir Edmund and his team discovered evidence of stand-up comedy dating back 1,000 years before Christ and his now famous Sermon on the Mount. The glyphs in the upper right-hand corner translate roughly as, "Hello, is this thing on? I just rode in from Memphis, and boy are my arms tired." Other notable discoveries on Hilarity's ultimately ill-fated Egyptian expedition include evidence of the first use of the now ubiquitous fake nose and mustache gag, the first known depiction of the use of spitballs, and evidence of novelty kiosks located in the Lower Nile specializing in the sale of papyrus patch dolls. Unfortunately, the decades of grueling fieldwork finally took their toll on Hilarity. He suffered a complete mental collapse while on a dig in the desert near Cairo, subsequently becoming totally obsessed with self-mummification and only mumbling incoherently to himself in what appeared to be limericks. He spent his remaining years in the highly respected Sunny Valley home for the totally nuts, outside Lincolnshire. Fortunately, Hilarity's work was carried on by his longtime assistant and companion, a young Scotsman named
Imus B. Daft.
Although lacking Hilarity's experience and keen archaeological instincts, Daft made a name for himself in his own right. Among these was revealing the origins of the wet willy now known to have been originated by Pestorus the Annoying, on the Carthaginian immigrant. Shown in this illustration demonstrating another of his innovations, the noogie, on a pair of his contemporaries. It was Daft who ultimately solved the mystery surrounding the origins of the invisible dog on a leash joke, now known to have originated in Sparta and is attributed to Erasmus the Armless, a part-time playwright and accomplished Olympic discus thrower of his day. While Daft and Hilarity combed the desert sands and the coastline of the Aegean Sea for clues to the earliest roots of our ridiculousness,
far to the north, another pair of researchers worked diligently at Oxford University.
combing the libraries and historical archive
At Oxford,
the renowned historian Betty Chuckles and a prominent professor of humorology, Shirley U. Jest, had teamed up in an attempt to peel back the layers of mythology, misconception, and mystery, which enshrouded the evolvement of senseless silliness during the Dark Ages and through the Renaissance. Chuckles and Jest were to women on a mission,
combing the vast historical archives at Oxford.
frequently working for days without sleep or chocolate. They scoured ancient texts and pored over fading manuscripts in search of clues to key developments along that long road of human quackiness. Working tirelessly for more than a decade, the two women managed to discover heretofore unknown facts for which they would later receive the coveted Nobel Puns Prize. Among their more remarkable findings were the discovery of a long-lost manuscript which revealed the forgotten story of Sir Launcelot, once a proud member of King Arthur's court, banned for feigning flatulence at the Round Table during meals, who subsequently went into seclusion and devoted the remainder of his life to perfecting the dribble glass, which he referred to in his diaries as the Unholy Grail. And then there was the discovery of diaries by Marco Polo's half-brother, Harpo, in which he reveals that it was not only silks and spices which his brother introduced to the European populace, but that he was also responsible for introducing the unsuspecting Europeans to one of the most distasteful pranks of all time, one of the most insidious of all inanities, the wedgie, shown here in an illustration from his diaries, as he witnessed with apparent disdain its practice in Lower Mongolia. And let's not forget the uncovering of manuscripts, apparently penned by Michelangelo on his deathbed, in which he claims remorseful responsibility for the whole pull-my-finger gag between God and Adam, which he surreptitiously splashed across the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, asserting to the Almighty that it was in fact an unintentional subliminal message, while in his characteristic fashion, attempts to inject a little levity into the situation by imploring God for forgiveness, while admitting that he is, in fact, a little stinker. And then there was the revelation that it was upon the Emperor Charlemagne's discovery that one of his predecessors, Constantine, had decreed that the whole of the empire become Christian, that he decided that he would decree that henceforth all midgets shall be funny. It was a royal edict whose veracity stood unchallenged for hundreds of years until MGM released the film The Wizard of Oz. And then there were, of course, the long-lost correspondences between the Vatican and the Spanish diocese. By virtue of these letters, we now know that the Catholic Church, when faced with multiple challenges during the Dark Ages, to include constant internal turmoil, several failed crusades, the plague, and a general dissatisfaction with their headgear, decided to attempt to inject a little levity into the otherwise morose population. To these ends, they recruited a group of wacky Jesuits to go in search of the elusive funny bone.
So, just tell us about this funny bone.
Yes, Gringo. Why don't you just make it easier on all of
All
us?
to no avail. And lastly, their landmark discovery that it was in fact Martin Luther who introduced the first knock-knock joke, which at the time of the filming of this documentary, the Catholic Church still fails to get.